The sun beat down on the bright green lawn as little Lily Harper ran across the backyard, her laughter ringing through the air like tiny bells. At 7 years old, she was the spitting image of her mother, with the same warm brown eyes and dimples that appeared when she smiled. Her curly hair bounced as she moved, catching the sunlight and turning golden at the edges. "Count to 20, Daddy. And no peeking," she called out, her voice filled with excitement. Tom Harper smiled at his daughter and covered his eyes with his hands, turning to face the old oak tree that stood tall in the corner of their yard. 1, 2, 3. He began counting loudly, hearing the rustle of grass and Lily's muffled giggles as she scurried away to find the perfect hiding spot. It was a normal Saturday afternoon in June 2017 in the peaceful neighborhood of Pine Grove. The kind of day that starts like any other. Parents making breakfast for sleepy-eyed children, neighbors mowing lawns, dogs barking at passing cars. The Harper family had lived in their 2-story brick home for nearly 10 years. Tom and his wife Jenny had moved there shortly after getting married, dreaming of filling the rooms with children and laughter. 17, 18, 19, 20. "Ready or not, here I come," Tom called out, turning around and scanning the yard. The family's golden retriever, Cooper, wagged his tail excitedly, thinking this was a game for him too. Tom walked, slowly making a show of looking in all the wrong places first, behind the garden shed, under the picnic table, inside the empty flower pots. This was their ritual. Lily loved when her dad pretended not to know where she was hiding. I wonder where Lily could be," Tom said loudly, winking at Cooper, who trotted alongside him. "Is she behind this bush? No. Is she under the porch swing? No." 5 minutes passed. Tom had checked all of Lily's usual hiding spots, the space behind the big rhododendron bush, the old playhouse in the corner, even inside the garden shed, which they normally kept locked, but sometimes forgot to. 10 minutes passed. The playful tone in Tom's voice shifted to something more urgent. "Lily, the game's over, honey, you win," he called out, his eyes now moving more quickly across the yard, checking places he'd already looked. 15 minutes passed. Tom's heart began to race. "Lily, come out now. This isn't funny anymore." Cooper seemed to sense the change in mood and began sniffing around more intently, as if understanding that finding Lily was no longer just a game. Tom ran to the wooden fence that surrounded their backyard, checking to make sure the gate was still locked from the inside. It was. He looked over to the neighbors' yards on both sides, but there was no sign of his daughter's blue sundress or her bouncing curls. "Jenny," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Jenny, can you come out here?" Jenny Harper had been inside, preparing lunch, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. She stepped onto the back porch, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her face showing mild curiosity at first. "What's up?" she asked, but the look on Tom's face made her stop in her tracks. "I can't find Lily," Tom said, the words coming out strained and hollow. Jenny's expression changed instantly. "What do you mean you can't find her? She's hiding, right? It's hide and seek." "I've looked everywhere, Jen. She's not in the yard." They both moved quickly then, calling Lily's name, checking inside the house, looking in closets, under beds, in any space a small girl might squeeze into for a game. Cooper followed them, barking occasionally as if trying to help. "Did you check the treehouse?" Jenny asked, her voice rising with panic. "You know she's been climbing up there even though we told her not to." Tom nodded. "First place I looked. After the obvious spots, she's not there." Their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, poked her head over the fence, drawn by the increasingly frantic calls. "Everything okay over there?" she asked, her face lined with concern. "Have you seen Lily?" Jenny asked, rushing to the fence. "Did she maybe come over to your yard somehow?" Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "No, dear. I've been gardening all morning. I haven't seen her at all." Within 30 minutes, their quiet street was filled with neighbors helping in the search. They checked under cars and garages, behind shrubs. Some walked toward the small wooded area 2 blocks away, calling Lily's name. "Did anyone see anything unusual today?" Officer Rodriguez asked after arriving with his partner. Any strangers in the neighborhood? Unfamiliar cars? Everyone shook their heads. Pine Grove was the kind of place where residents noticed anything out of place, and today had been completely normal, until now. By evening, the local police had set up a command center in the Harpers' living room. Cooper lay by the door, as if waiting for Lily to return, occasionally lifting his head when someone entered, only to lower it again in disappointment. Jenny sat rigidly on the couch, clutching Lily's favorite stuffed elephant, her eyes red from crying but now dry and wide with shock. Tom paced the floor, answering the same questions from different officers, each time his voice growing more hollow. "And you're sure the gate was locked?" they asked. "Yes." Tom nodded for what felt like the 100th time. "It's always locked. We're careful about that because of the pool down the street." "And you never heard it open? Never heard any unusual sounds at all?" "Nothing," Tom whispered, his mind replaying those 20 seconds when his eyes were closed, counting. 20 seconds that had somehow stretched into hours, and now threatened to extend into an unbearable forever. As darkness fell, search parties with flashlights moved through the neighborhood and into the surrounding areas. A helicopter buzzed overhead, its spotlight cutting through the night. Inside the Harper home, police officers spoke in hushed tones about expanding the search, about issuing an Amber Alert, about bringing in dogs in the morning. "She's just 7, Jenny said suddenly to no one in particular, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the room. "She's afraid of the dark." Outside, a light summer rain began to fall, washing away any tracks or scents that might have helped lead them to Lily. Cooper whined softly by the door, somehow understanding that something precious had slipped away from them all, vanishing as completely as if it had never been there at all. The night grew deeper, and still, Lily Harper did not come home. Morning broke over Pine Grove with a harsh brightness that seemed cruel against the darkness of the situation. The Harper family's neat brick home, usually so peaceful, was now the center of frantic activity. Police cars lined the street, and uniformed officers walked in and out with grim expressions. Neighbors huddled on their porches, speaking in hushed tones and watching as search teams gathered on the sidewalk. Inside, Tom Harper sat at the kitchen table, his untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. His eyes were bloodshot from a night without sleep, his hands trembling slightly as Detective Carol Miller asked him to go through the events one more time. "So you were playing hide and seek," Detective Miller said, her voice gentle but firm. "And you counted to 20 with your back turned to the yard." Tom nodded, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "Yes, like we always do. 20 seconds. That's all it took." "And you're absolutely certain the gate was locked?" "Yes," Tom said, his voice cracking. "I check it every morning. It's a habit." In the living room, Jenny sat with a victim advocate, looking through recent photos of Lily for the police to use. Her fingers brushed over Lily's smiling face in a picture from her school's spring concert just 2 weeks ago. "She was wearing a blue sundress yesterday," Jenny said quietly, "with little white flowers on it, and her hair—" Her voice caught. "Her hair was in 2 braids. I did them myself after breakfast." Outside, Officer Ben Chen organized volunteers into search parties. "We need to cover every inch of the neighborhood and the woods behind the elementary school," he instructed. "Remember, we're looking for a 7-year-old girl, about 3.5 feet tall, brown curly hair, blue sundress." Cooper, the family's golden retriever, paced anxiously between the backyard and the front door, occasionally letting out a soft whine. A K-9 unit had arrived, and a German shepherd named Rex was being given one of Lily's pajama tops to sniff. By noon, Lily's face was on every local news channel. The headline, "7-year-old disappears from backyard," flashed across screens throughout the county. The phone in the Harper house rang constantly, reporters seeking statements, neighbors offering help, and the occasional tip from people who thought they might have seen something. Detective Miller spread a map of Pine Grove across the table. "Let's mark everywhere that's been searched," she said to her team. "And I want to know about every registered offender within a 50-mile radius." As the day wore on, the investigation took a turn that no one had expected. 2 officers pulled Detective Miller aside after interviewing neighbors. Mrs. Wilson next door says she saw Tom leave the yard briefly during their game. One of the officers reported. Says he went inside for maybe 5 minutes. Detective Miller frowned. Tom Harper stated he never left the yard during the game. When confronted with this discrepancy, Tom's face paled. I forgot, he stammered. I went in to get my phone. It was ringing. I thought it might be work. It was just a spam call, so I didn't even answer it. I wasn't even gone 2 minutes. 2 minutes or 5, that's enough time for something to happen, Mr. Harper, Detective Miller said, her tone noticeably cooler. Why didn't you mention this before? I don't know, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. It didn't seem important. It wasn't important. I've been trying to remember every detail, every second. From that moment, subtle shifts began to occur in the investigation. Questions to Tom became more pointed. Officers who had been sympathetic now watched, him with veiled suspicion. Neighbors who had been supportive began to whisper when he walked by. They took his phone. Jenny overheard Mrs. Wilson telling another neighbor. And they were looking at the garden shed for a long time. 3 days after Lily's disappearance, the media narrative began to change. Headlines now read, Fathers, Timeline questioned in missing girl case, and Police focus on family home and disappearance investigation. Jenny found herself torn between defending her husband and her own growing doubts. She caught herself watching Tom when he thought no one was looking, searching for any sign of guilt, any clue that he knew more than he was saying. I know what they're thinking, Tom said one night, after another grueling day of searches and interviews. I can see it in their eyes. They think I did something to her. Jenny wanted to reassure him, to say that of course no one thought that. But the words wouldn't come. A week passed, then 2. The command center in the Harper home was dismantled, though Detective Miller assured them the investigation was still active. The volunteers dwindled. The news crews moved on to other stories, though Lily's face still appeared in a small box during the local evening news, alongside other missing children. Tom began to receive anonymous calls. Where did you bury her? One caller asked before, hanging up. He found the word killer spray-painted on their driveway one morning. The police searched the family home from top to bottom. They drained the decorative pond in the Harper's backyard. They brought in ground-penetrating radar to check for disturbed earth. They searched Tom's work truck and questioned his co-workers about his behavior in the days leading up to Lily's disappearance. Nothing was found. No evidence of foul play. No sign of Lily. We're not giving up, Detective Miller told Jenny during one of her now weekly visits. But we need to be realistic about the possibilities. Jenny nodded numbly. The word possibilities hung in the air between them, too terrible to contemplate fully. At night, alone in their bedroom, Jenny and Tom lay on opposite sides of the bed, a gulf between them that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. The silence in Lily's room down the hall was deafening. Do you ever think about moving? Tom asked one night, his voice startling in the darkness. Starting fresh somewhere else? Jenny turned to look at him, really look at him, for what felt like the first time in weeks. I can't leave, she said simply. What if she comes back and we're not here? Tom didn't answer, but in the dim light from the window, Jenny could see tears sliding down his face. Outside, the summer nights grew shorter. Lily's 7th birthday came and went. The investigation was officially classified as cold, though Detective Miller promised they would follow up on any new leads. And still the question remained, unspoken, but ever present. What happened during those 20 seconds of a hide-and-seek game on an ordinary Saturday in June? Time has a way of moving forward, even when it seems impossible that it should. Days turned into months, and months eventually stretched into years. The seasons changed, bringing rain that washed away the last of the search markers, snow that covered the trampled grass where police had searched, and new spring growth that slowly erased the physical reminders of that terrible day. 3 years after Lily's disappearance, the Harper household had become a shell of what it once was. The colorful flower beds that Jenny had lovingly tended now grew wild and untamed. The swing set in the backyard stood unused, its red paint peeling and fading under the relentless sun. Inside, the changes were even more profound. Tom and Jenny moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, their conversations limited to practical matters. "I paid the electric bill," Tom might say over a dinner neither of them was eating. "Thanks," Jenny would reply, her eyes focused, somewhere beyond the kitchen wall. Cooper, once so playful and energetic, had grown old before his time. He still slept outside Lily's bedroom door every night, his graying muzzle resting on his paws, eyes watching and waiting. It was on a rainy Tuesday in April when Tom finally spoke the words that had been hanging between them for months. "I got a job offer," he said, his coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "In Arizona." Jenny looked up slowly. "Arizona," she repeated, as if trying to place the word in her understanding of the world. "The construction company I've been doing contract work for. They want me full-time. It's a good opportunity." What Tom didn't say, what he didn't need to say, was that it was also an escape, a chance to go somewhere where people didn't cross the street to avoid him, where cashiers didn't stare a beat too long when reading his credit card name, where he wasn't that father whose daughter vanished. "When would you go?" Jenny asked, her voice oddly calm. "End of the month," Tom replied. "I've already found an apartment." Jenny nodded, turning her gaze to the window where rain streaked down the glass in crooked paths. "I think that's for the best." They both knew she wasn't going with him. Jenny couldn't leave the house, couldn't leave Pine Grove, couldn't leave Lily. The divorce papers were signed without argument, their once shared life divided with a quiet efficiency that spoke volumes about how separate they had already become. Tom packed his belongings into his truck one Friday morning, kneeling to give Cooper one last scratch behind the ears. "You take care of her," he whispered to the old dog, who thumped his tail once in acknowledgement. Jenny stood in the doorway, arms crossed against the spring chill, watching as Tom slid into the driver's seat. For a moment, their eyes met across the driveway. There was no anger there, only a shared grief that had proven too heavy to carry together. "I'll call when I'm settled," Tom said. They both knew he wouldn't. After Tom left, Jenny threw herself into the one thing that still gave, her purpose, the foundation she had started in Lily's name. Find Our Children provided support to families of missing kids, helping with everything from printing flyers to navigating the complex legal system and media attention that came with such cases. Every morning, Jenny would sit at her computer in what had once been the family room, now converted into an office. The walls were covered with photos of children, some found, many still missing. Lily's picture hung in the center, a school portrait from first grade, her smile revealing a newly lost front tooth. "We have a new case in Hampton County," Lisa, her volunteer coordinator, would say during their morning call. 6-year-old boy, missing since Saturday, and Jenny would nod, pulling out the foundation's checklist, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call Detective Miller to see if she can advise on the search perimeter, and we'll need volunteers to help the family with meals." The foundation grew, gaining recognition and even some grant funding. Jenny was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences, sharing insights from both her personal experience and the dozens of cases she had now worked on. "The first 48 hours are critical," she would tell rooms full of officers, her voice steady despite the ache that never left her chest. "But families need to know you haven't given up even years later." At home, though, Jenny lived in a kind of suspended animation. Lily's room remained untouched, a time capsule of a 7-year-old's life. Stuffed animals arranged on the bed, books neatly lined on shelves, a pair of small sneakers still by the door where they had been kicked off the night before she disappeared. Jenny cleaned it weekly, dusting the untouched toys, changing the sheets that no one slept in, replacing the water in the vase of artificial flowers on the bedside table. "People think it's unhealthy," she told her therapist during one of her monthly sessions. "They think I should move on, as if there's somewhere to move on to." Dr. Pat nodded, her kind face showing understanding rather than judgment. "There's no handbook for grief like yours, Jenny. No timeline for healing when there's been no closure. In the evenings, Jenny would sit on the back porch with Cooper, now moving slowly with arthritis, watching the sunset over the yard where her life had changed in 20 seconds. Sometimes neighbors would bring casseroles or invite her to dinner. The suspicion that had once surrounded the family had gradually given way to a kind of communal pity. Poor Jenny Harper, they would say, still living in that house, waiting for a ghost. Occasionally, she'd accept these invitations, making small talk about the weather or local politics. She'd smile at appropriate moments, laugh when expected, but a part of her always remained distant, as if she were observing life rather than participating in it. There were men who showed interest. A widowed teacher at the elementary school, a police officer who had joined the force after Lily's case. Jenny would have coffee with them once, maybe twice, before gently ending things. "I'm still married," she would say, though legally this wasn't true. Just not to someone here anymore. What she meant, what she couldn't explain, was that she was married to the waiting. To the possibility, however faint, that one day the phone would ring and Lily would be on the other end. That one day she would look up and see a girl. No, a young woman now with familiar eyes standing on her doorstep. And so the years continued to pass. 5 years, 6, 7. The world turned. People moved in and out of Pine Grove. Cooper finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, still faithful to his post outside Lily's room. And Jenny Harper continued to wait, suspended between a past she couldn't escape and a future she couldn't imagine. 8 years. Almost to the day. Jenny Harper looked at the calendar on her kitchen wall where she had crossed off yesterday's date. Tomorrow would mark exactly 8 years since Lily vanished. 8 years of birthdays without candles being blown out. 8 years of Christmas mornings without excited footsteps racing down the stairs. 8 years of not knowing. The house felt emptier now without Cooper. The old dog had been her steady companion through it all, and his absence left another hole in her already patchwork heart. Some nights she still listened for the click of his nails on the hardwood floors, the soft whine he would make when dreaming. Jenny sipped her morning coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. Over the years, she had let most of it grow wild. The flower beds were overrun with whatever decided to bloom there. The old swing set stood like a rusty skeleton against the fence. Only the small path to the shed remained clear, and Jenny rarely ventured even that far. The ringing of her phone broke the morning quiet. It was Lisa from the foundation. "Jenny, just checking if you're still coming to the fundraiser planning meeting this afternoon." Jenny sighed. She had forgotten all about it. "I'm not sure, Lisa. Tomorrow is—" "I know what tomorrow is," Lisa said gently. "That's why I'm calling. We don't expect you to come in. The volunteers can handle everything." After hanging up, Jenny wandered into the living room, now dominated by a large corkboard covered with missing children posters, news clippings, and notes. In the center was Lily's picture, surrounded by all the others she had helped search for over the years. Many of the photos had been taken down and placed in a different box, the one marked found. Some alive, some not, but all with answers, at least. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Detective Miller, now Captain Miller, standing there with a small potted plant in her hands. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, though they both knew that wasn't true. For 8 years, Captain Miller had shown up on this day, the day before the anniversary, bringing a plant, a cake, once even a bottle of wine, a small gesture to say, "I remember. I haven't forgotten." "Come in," Jenny said, stepping aside. "Coffee's fresh." They sat in the kitchen, talking about nothing important at first. Captain Miller's teenage daughter starting driving lessons, the new coffee shop downtown, the unusually warm spring they were having. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed last time?" Captain Miller finally asked, setting down her mug. Jenny nodded slowly. The question of selling the house, of moving on, literally, to somewhere new. "I've looked at a few places online," she admitted. "There's a small apartment near the foundation office that might work." Captain Miller reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's been 8 years, Jenny. You've done everything humanly possible. Living somewhere else doesn't mean giving up on Lily. After Captain Miller left, Jenny stood in the middle of her living room, looking at the walls covered with memories. Maybe it was time. Maybe living with ghosts wasn't really living at all. The next morning, Jenny called a local landscaping company. If she was going to sell the house, the yard needed work. Lots of it. She couldn't face doing it herself. Too many memories buried in that soil. But she could pay someone else to bring it back to life for the next family. "We can start next week," the man on the phone told her. "But I should warn you, it's going to be quite a job, especially around that old oak tree. The roots have really taken over. The oak tree." Jenny felt a small pang. It had been Lily's favorite climbing spot, though they had always told her to be careful. Tom had been planning to build her a proper treehouse the summer she disappeared. "Actually," Jenny said, surprising herself, "I think I'll take care of the area around the oak tree myself. Just focus on the rest of the yard." That afternoon, Jenny stood at the back door, looking out at the massive oak that dominated the far corner of the yard. She hadn't been near it in years, always veering away on the rare occasions she went into the backyard. Now she forced herself to walk toward it, garden gloves in one hand and pruning shears in the other. The area around the base of the tree was a tangle of weeds and volunteer saplings that had sprouted from acorns. Jenny knelt down and began to clear them away, one by one. The physical work felt good, pulling, cutting, clearing. For the first time in years, she felt like she was actually doing something instead of just waiting. As she worked her way around the massive trunk, pulling up stubborn weeds, her hand hit something solid beneath the soil. At first, she thought, it was just another root, but it felt different, smoother, man-made. Jenny dug around it with her garden trowel, curiosity overcoming her initial hesitation. It was a box, a small metal container about the size of a lunchbox buried several inches deep. It had once been painted pink, but years in the damp soil had faded and chipped the color. Her heart pounding, Jenny pried it open. Inside, protected by the watertight seal, was a child's treasure trove. A small notebook with a unicorn on the cover, several colorful rocks, a plastic charm bracelet, a folded piece of paper covered in crayon drawings, and, Jenny gasped, Lily's favorite hair ribbon, the one she had been wearing the day she disappeared. With trembling hands, Jenny opened the notebook. On the first page, in large, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Lily's secret box. Keep out." Jenny turned the pages slowly, tears blurring her vision. Most contained the typical scribblings of a 7-year-old, drawings of rainbows and horses, lists of favorite foods and TV shows, the names of friends from school written in different colored pencils. But as she neared the end of the notebook, Jenny's hands froze. There on the second-to-last page, dated the day before Lily disappeared, was a drawing of what looked like a treasure map of their backyard. X marks the spot was written in wobbly letters near the oak tree, and below it, in Lily's distinctive handwriting, "Going on a big adventure tomorrow. Uncle Rick is taking me to see the real treasure." Uncle Rick. The name hit Jenny like a physical blow. Richard Bennett, her cousin from her mother's side who had visited them that summer, who had played games with Lily and brought her little gifts, who had left town suddenly the day after she disappeared claiming a work emergency, who was now in prison in another state for an unrelated crime. Jenny stared at the page, her whole body shaking. After 8 years of not knowing, of imagining, the worst and hoping against hope, here was something real, something tangible, a clue that had been literally under her feet all this time. With the box clutched to her chest, Jenny ran into the house and grabbed her phone, her fingers clumsy, as she dialed Captain Miller's number. "I found something," she said, her voice breaking. "You need to come see this now." Captain Miller arrived at Jenny's house in record time, still wearing the half-formal outfit from the department meeting she'd been in when she got the call. Her eyes widened when Jenny showed her the box and its contents. "This changes everything," she said, carefully examining the notebook page with the mention of Uncle Rick. "We questioned Richard Bennett briefly after Lily disappeared, but he had an alibi for the afternoon. Said he was already on the road back to Idaho. Jenny clutched the small hair ribbon that had belonged to her daughter, its once bright blue now faded with time. He lied. He must have. Lily wrote this the day before she disappeared. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. The local police station buzzed with activity unseen since the initial days of Lily's disappearance 8 years ago. The cold case was suddenly red hot. Captain Miller personally called the prison in Nevada, where Richard Bennett was serving time for an unrelated child endangerment conviction. "We need to talk to him," she told the warden, "and we need to do it now." Jenny insisted on going with them. "I've waited 8 years," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not waiting any longer." The flight to Nevada was the first time Jenny had left Pine Grove in years. Looking down at the patchwork of fields and roads below, she felt strangely disconnected from the world she'd been living in. A world of waiting, of suspended grief. "We've got officers searching Bennett's old property in Idaho," Captain Miller told her as their rental car sped toward the state prison outside of Reno. "And we're getting a warrant for his storage unit." Jenny nodded, her hands fidgeting with Lily's hair ribbon, which she'd brought along like a talisman. "Do you think—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Captain Miller's expression softened. "I don't know, Jenny, but we're going to find out." The prison was a stark concrete building surrounded by layers of fencing topped with razor wire. Inside, the air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Jenny and Captain Miller waited. In a small interview room, its walls painted an institutional beige. When Richard Bennett was let in, Jenny almost didn't recognize him. The charming, handsome cousin who had visited them that summer 8 years ago had aged poorly. His hair was mostly gone, his skin sallow, his shoulders hunched. He looked surprised to see Jenny, but his expression quickly shifted to a practiced neutrality. Well, family reunion?" Captain Miller took charge, placing the photocopy of Lily's notebook page on the table. "We found this. Lily wrote it the day before she disappeared." Bennett glanced at it, then away, his face betraying nothing. "Kids have wild imaginations." "Richard," Jenny said, using his full name deliberately. "Please, it's been 8 years. If you know anything about what happened to Lily, tell us." For a long moment, Bennett said nothing, just stared at the wall behind them. Then he sighed, a small, defeated sound. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just supposed to be an adventure." That's what I told her. Jenny felt the room tilt slightly, Captain Miller's steady hand on her arm anchoring her to reality. "What happened?" Captain Miller asked, her voice professionally calm. Bennett's story came out in halting fragments. How he had been fascinated by Lily's imagination, her trust. How he had told her about a real treasure in the woods a few miles from their house. How she had been so excited about their secret adventure. "I told her to hide the box with our map and meet me at the fence when her dad wasn't looking," Bennett said, his eyes fixed on the table. "She was so good at hiding. Said she could sneak away during hide and seek." Jenny pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as the story unfolded. Bennett had picked Lily up at the fence, hidden from view by the large rhododendron bushes, and driven her toward the woods. "But she got scared," he continued. "Started crying about wanting to go home. Said she'd tell her parents what I did. I panicked." What followed was the account of every parent's worst nightmare. A struggle in the car. An accident, or so Bennett claimed. Lily hitting her head. Panic. A hasty burial in a remote area of national forest land. "I can show you where," Bennett finished, finally meeting Jenny's eyes. "I never meant for her to get hurt. You have to believe that." Jenny stared at the man across the table, this person who had been at their family cookouts, who had once helped Tom build the garden shed, who had stolen her daughter's life and her family's future in one terrible act. "I don't have to believe anything you say," she said quietly. "Just take us to her." 2 days later, under heavy police escort, Richard Bennett led them to a small clearing in the Boise National Forest. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom among the pine needles covering the forest floor. "Here," he said, pointing to an area between 2 large pine trees. "I buried her here." The forensic team worked with painstaking care, gently removing layers of earth. Jenny stood nearby, Captain Miller at her side, as the hours passed. The sun was beginning to set when one of the technicians called out. They had found remains, small bones, fragments of fabric that matched the description of Lily's blue sundress and a small silver locket that Tom and Jenny had given Lily for her 7th birthday, just a month before she disappeared. Jenny knelt in the soft earth, cradling the locket in her palm. Inside was a tiny photo of the 3 of them, Jenny, Tom, and Lily, smiling on a beach vacation. A moment of perfect happiness preserved behind glass. "Can I call Tom?" she asked Captain Miller. He should know. As the forensic team continued their work, Jenny walked to a quiet spot among the trees, phone in hand. The number she dialed had remained unchanged in her contacts for 8 years, though she had rarely used it. Tom answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious. "Jenny? We found her," Jenny said simply, watching as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the pine branches. "We know what happened." There was a long silence on the other end, then the sound of quiet weeping. "I'll be on the next flight," Tom said. 3 weeks later, they held a proper funeral for Lily. The small white casket was covered with wildflowers. Tom stood beside Jenny, both of them older and marked by grief, but somehow standing straighter than they had in years. The people of Pine Grove came out in force: neighbors, police officers who had worked the case, volunteers from the foundation, even Mrs. Wilson, who had once looked at Tom with suspicion. "I'd like to announce something," Jenny said after the service, standing before the gathered mourners. "The Find Our Children Foundation will be expanding its mission. We'll now be focused on prevention and education, helping children understand the dangers of secrets kept from parents." She glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. "It will be called the Lily Harper Safety Project," Jenny continued, "so that other families might be spared what ours has endured." As people began to disperse, Jenny and Tom walked together to the small headstone, its marble surface still bright and new in the afternoon sun. "What now?" Tom asked quietly. Jenny looked up at the blue sky, feeling the weight of 8 years of waiting finally lifting from her shoulders. "Now we remember her, and we help others. That's all we can do." They placed 2 small stones on top of Lily's headstone, a tradition Jenny had learned from a family she had helped through the foundation, and walked together toward the waiting cars. The truth they had discovered was not the miracle they had once hoped for. There would be no joyful reunion, no second chance at the life they had planned. But there was, at last, an answer. And with that answer came the possibility of a different kind of future, one built not on endless waiting but on memory, purpose, and perhaps eventually peace.